Live from Joe's mom's basement, it's the Stacking Benjamin Show. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, and on today's Roundtable, we're talking about debt with the woman who wants to see you indebted only to your mortgage broker. It's Paula Pant. Then the guy who wants to help you avoid debt by maximizing your income. It's the host of the personal finance podcast, Andrew Giancola. And finally, the man who we're indebted to for joining us today. It's the host of Earn and Invest podcast, Doc G. But that's not all. Halfway through the show, I'll share my accumulated debt question. We're going to have a debt question. It's not going to be a trivia question. 3, 2, 1. Still the drugs. 3, 2, 1. But that's not all. Halfway through the show, I'll share my accumulated trivia question. And now a guy who owes a debt of gratitude to me. It's Joe Saul-Sehy.
It's funny. We do owe a huge debt of gratitude to Doug because people don't know this. Doug, you had some dental work done today. We didn't think you're like a just in time.
Yeah. Very recently, I had dental work very recently, and as we speak, the Novocaine and all of the drugs is wearing off. I'm feeling it pretty good right now. So I have no idea what's going to come out of my mouth this next hour.
And that's what makes Fridays a Stacking
And
Benjamin's
this is all in preparation
adventure.
for it's all in prep for an emergency root canal that's on its way, screaming towards me tomorrow afternoon.
You are living the dream, my friend.
This is, yeah.
I
hope we're going to talk about emergency funds because that's exactly what's getting tapped for my root canal.
We're going to talk about going into debt with your dentist, apparently, is what we're going to talk about. By
That's
the way,
exactly
before we
what's
introduce
gonna
you to
happen.
everybody else, today's episode brought to you by State Farm. If you own a small business, whatever your business might be, you need someone who understands, and that's where and that's where State Farm Small Business Insurance comes in. State Farm agents are small business owners too and know what it takes. They can help you choose personalized policies that fit your budget. Small business insurance from State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Talk to your local agent today. So let's introduce you to today's State Farm sponsored Roundtable. I feel like we're at like the Coliseum. And in the right corner, in Manhattan right now, I believe, with the reddest microphone on earth, Paula Pant is here. How are you, man?
Oh, I'm great. And look, the jacket that's draped across the back of my chair matches the microphone. So I've got red is sort of the
Highlights.
theme around here. Exactly.
Now, did you do that because today we're going to talk about people that are in the red and not getting in the red with your money?
Oh, yes, I definitely thought ahead. Sure, yeah. We're gonna run with that story.
I planned that whole thing. Yeah.
Yes.
And
And then I have black hair because if you get out of debt, then you're in the black. See?
There it is.
Works.
Yes,
It flows.
absolutely. Makes total sense. And a guy who always makes sense on our sister podcast, the Earn and Invest Show. We're super happy he's back. Doc G's here. How are you, my friend?
Well, actually, it's not just amazing that Doug is here. In fact, I think he's kind of a wuss. I had hernia surgery this morning, both sides.
And ran 5
walked
miles
home
after, right?
And walked home the 5 miles because they wouldn't let me drive. So, I mean, a little wussy dental procedure I'm not too worried about.
There's no way. Did you really?
Damn.
You did not.
No, of
You
course
did
not.
I feel
Okay,
like
I was
we're
like,
going to
wait.
square up after the show.
That is pretty good. I did have a neighbor one day that Doug, you may remember these neighbors when we lived close together, brought me over frozen peas. And the woman goes, "Yeah, we're not going to eat this bag of frozen peas. So you guys want them?" I'm like, "What's wrong with them?" And she goes, "Nothing. They're fine." And I put my hand out because I'm like, free food, right? Free frozen food. Who cares? And I put my hand out and then I put it back away because I realized her husband had just had a vasectomy that morning. And even though the peas were fine, I wasn't going near those peas. No, thank you. And the guy who's wondering, why the hell do I get to follow the vasectomy story? He's back for the Personal Finance Podcast. Andrew Giancola joins us. Hey, man, good to see you.
Those are my favorite stories to follow, actually. And I love debt puns, and you guys are killing it right now. 10 out of 10 so far. So I love this.
Well, you got to bring one. You got one of your own?
I gotta come up with one. I'll come up with one by the end of the show for sure.
He's
I don't have them
he's
locked
got
and loaded like you guys do.
He's got to go jump on. Yeah, you got to come here more often, Andrew, so you can, get the ninja dad joke stuff going. Well,
Exactly.
speaking of,
So the debt that he owes us is a pun.
oh my
That's right.
God,
Hmm.
is upon us. I don't know. Andrew, quick before we keep going, tell everybody that hasn't seen your prior appearances, doesn't know about the Personal Finance Podcast, about the awesomeness of your show, man.
Absolutely. So I'm the host of the Personal Finance Podcast, and we just try to make personal finance as simple as possible. So that is kind of our entire goal, and that's exactly what we do.
It's a really cryptic name. I don't know how you came
I try
up
to
with
make it as cryptic as possible.
Yeah, what exactly do you cover? Well, personal finance.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here with us, Andrew. Again, we always have fun when you're here. We've got you, we got Paula Pant, we got Doc G, we got neighbor Doug. Well, kind of got neighbor. We got like 3/4 of neighbor Doug right now. So before we get into it, there's a reason why this show is free. We love the fact that it's free, and we've got amazing sponsors to help us keep it free. We're going to hear from one of those right now. 3, 2, 1. All right. Time for us to talk about debt. So let's go. Today's piece comes to us from a guy I've never heard of before named Morgan Housel. Is it Housel? Is that how it's pronounced? So, a little known personal finance author. Guy might have thought a thing or two before. But for those of you that don't know who Morgan Housel is, he has been on the Afford Anything podcast.
Many times. Yes, he's incredible. One of the most brilliant minds in personal finance.
Yeah, behind the present company, right? That was what
yes,
you were going to say next.
Yes. Present company excluded. One of the most brilliant minds in personal finance.
Right. This is inspired by, I want to go through Morgan's piece first, but we're certainly not going to end with Morgan's piece. But Morgan says how I think about debt. And the second Morgan Housel says how I think about debt. I mean, they're going to call Morgan Housel, or in this case, I thought, you know what, with Andrew being here and personal finance and Doc G and Paula, this is the perfect group to kind of bandy about, as mom says, all the things that Morgan talks about. So Morgan begins. And by the way, if you don't have this in front of you, stackers, no big deal. You can go to the website, stackingbenjamins.com, and look it up, but you're not going to need it. We will tell you everything you need to know about this. He begins talking about this quote from a guy, Kent Nurburn. He says, debt defines your future. And when your future is defined, hope begins to die. Andrew, when you read that, debt defines your future. When your future is defined, hope begins to die. What did you think of that quote?
I thought that was a very interesting quote. And, when it comes to looking at the difference between, debt and no debt, it is something that overall for me, there's a huge debate back and forth. And there's a lot of things that we can talk through as we go through this episode today. But I just think that is something that is a drastic quote when you think about debt and how you kind of think through, this entire scope of debt and something that I think is one end of the spectrum for sure. There's what I call the Ramsey end of the spectrum, which is just no debt whatsoever. And on the other end of the spectrum, you can kind of see people who are get way too aggressive, which we can talk through today. Yeah,
leveraged all the time. Morgan continues, not only does hope begin to die, but the number of outcomes you can endure does too. And he talks about then all the things that are going to happen in your life, right? We're going to have recessions, wars, divorces, illness, moves, floods, change of heart. All these different things are going to happen. And those might change our financial situation. And he says, if you don't have debt, well, then this volatility that's in your life, what does he say? Does he say that you can handle it better without debt?
Well, so essentially what he says is that if you imagine a graph of your life, right? And you imagine the volatility. So just have that visual in your mind, right? So you can imagine these ups, these downs, glorious moments and treacherous moments. And if you imagine what you're currently able to handle as an upper threshold and a lower threshold, right? Without debt, the upper and lower boundaries of that threshold are fairly wide, but with debt, those boundaries start to narrow, that range narrows. And with the more debt you have, the narrower that range goes. So debt essentially narrows the range of volatility that you are able to withstand.
Let's take a second, Paula, though, and talk about why that is for people that are new to this game. Because there was a time when I thought, and Andrew, you alluded to this earlier, using other people's money was great. I didn't understand any of it. I just had my first credit card, and I was like, man, we are going out to dinner, everybody, and American Express is paying for it. So Paula, why is it that the range is narrower if you have debt?
You have a given obligation, right? And we all inherently have certain obligations that we can never escape. We have to eat, for example. There's no escaping that. We have to live indoors. There's no escaping that, right? But beyond the unchanging obligations, debt adds yet another burden that then shackles us and decreases the amount of autonomy and freedom that we have.
Is the shackle, though, just to define this a little more for people that are as dumb as I was when I had debt, is the shackle the amount of money you owe, or is it that monthly obligation of committed future paychecks that's shackling you, or is it both?
I would say the monthly obligation is the shackle, and the total amount of money that you owe is the long-term impact on your net worth. So, for example, if you owe $100,000, but your monthly payment is $10 a month, it's not that much of a shackle, right? But if you owe $100,000, if you owe that same $100,000 and the monthly payment is $1,000 a month, it's a much bigger shackle. So that shackles what you can do in the short term. But let's go back to your monthly payment is $10 a month, but you owe $1 million. All right, that's going to have a significant impact on your net worth, even though it doesn't necessarily shackle the now.
Doc, I'm happy to have everybody here, but I'm especially happy to have you here today because we're going to couple two things together that people don't normally put together. And these are the discussions I know you like to have, but you are, people that don't know, you are finishing a book about purpose that will come out next year. And it's interesting. It seems to me that the way Morgan talks about this, it might be harder to think about what your purpose is in life when you're indebted to other people. Would you say that's true?
I think that debt and responsibilities, especially responsibilities towards things that don't light you up, are always going to subtract away time you can spend from doing things you want to be doing, things that feel purposeful. And so the question is, what role does debt play in your life? And let me give you two scenarios. I could take out debt to become a world-class skier. And that's something that really excites me, and skiing really lights me up. In this case, debt actually is an enabler for me to do something I really want to do. On the other hand, if I take out too much debt, or I can't make money doing the skiing, or I don't have some kind of backup plan, I might get that short-term boon of doing what I want to do, but eventually run out and then maybe never get to do that again. So let's compare that to something else. Let's say I really am not that connected to owning a house, but I've heard that everyone should own a house. So I'm going to take out a huge amount of debt to buy this really, really big house because that's how I'm going to keep up with the Joneses. And that's something I think is important. But the problem is that debt doesn't go to something that's really purposeful for me. So I have this big house, but that doesn't really light me up. And then I'm really shackled by that debt. And so what I really think about is debt can be both an enabler or it can be an inhibitor. And it really depends on how you use it. And I would also argue it depends on what season of your life you use it in. Because I think when we use debt when we're very young and we have a high risk tolerance, we can manage some of that volatility that comes with debt and risk. Whereas when we get older and we have a lot more to lose, and going bankrupt when you're 60 or 70 is a big difference than going bankrupt when you're 25. Debt doesn't serve us nearly as well as we get older, but could really serve us when we're younger. In fact, I always tell people the best way to make a lot of money, if you don't have a trade, if you don't have a skill set that's going to make you a lot of money, is through real estate. And how do you do that? Well, as a young person, you do it through leverage. Debt can be a wonderful enabler if used correctly.
Paul, I remember Josh Dorkin, the creator of Bigger Pockets, I've had wonderful discussions with Josh, but a great discussion. Josh talked about during the run up after 2007, 2008 of real estate over the subsequent decade. And he was talking about how, you know, how just before that 2007, 2008, you saw all those infomercials on TV for older people. Carlton Sheets was a guy. Doug, you remember that guy, Carlton Sheets? They had all these guys on TV talking about make money quickly in real estate. And we have that today still, right? We got these people make money now, not as many as we had a few years ago, but we have all these people there. And debt and Paula, I remember Josh telling me, to Doc's point, that real estate creates millionaires faster because of leverage, and it also flushes the toilet faster when things go bad, because so many people wash out and get in trouble because they use so much debt. As a real estate investor, what do you think of that?
I absolutely agree with that. So two points. Number one is that the word leverage is perfect because it evokes the image of a lever, right? And a lever is simply something that propels you either upward or downward a lot faster. So leverage is actually a perfect, it is a lever in either direction. The second thing is, with real estate specifically, real estate is the one type of debt that the average person, the average middle class person in the US is able to access. Most people are not able to access small business loans without a lot of hassle and headache. Most people, I don't believe, are able to access buying stocks on margin, or if they are, it's just a very small amount. But real estate is the one type of debt that the average middle class American can access. And so I think that's why it becomes that lever for so many people.
Andrew, you know, when Doc was talking, he's talking about early in life and using debt. It brings up this phrase that you and I hear all the time, man. You ready for these two words? Good debt. Is there such a thing as good debt?
I think that there can be, and I think real estate's a great example of something that can be good debt, because one big thing with real estate, obviously, is you make all your money when you run the numbers up front. It's all made in the beginning, and you're making sure that you're actually running the numbers properly and that the property is actually cash flowing. And when you do that, a lot of times you can figure out, hey, is this going to cash flow? Is this going to make me extra money? And can I pay off the mortgage? And in addition to making sure all the other numbers are correct and factoring in all the expenses. And so when you do things like that, where you can utilize debt in a way that can create more income for you, I think there can be good debt out there. Another way to do this, and the cool thing about real estate, is you can also get really creative in the way you structure debt. So, for example, you can find off-market properties where you can talk to the seller and do seller financing. Seller financing is one of my favorite ways to find good debt, because the amount that you guarantee is more so on the property, instead of owing the actual total amount left if something were to happen or some catastrophic event. So there's a lot of things where you have reduced guarantees when you do seller financing with businesses and or when it comes to real estate. So there are situations where you can find good debt. Another great example is going out and buying a business like we're talking about here, where this is something I did over the course of the last year, and we structured it in a seller financing way where we had this seller financing set up, but the personal guarantee renews once a year for 1 year every single year. So the guarantees are a little bit different how we structured those, but there's just various creative ways that you can do some of this stuff when it comes to good debt. So I see good debt as something where it's got to be, you got to understand and really know what you're doing. You have to understand what you're investing in. And if you do have an understanding of that and you do it in the right way up front, I can see that there can be good debt as long as you're cash flowing.
So many questions, but what does the personal guarantee mean?
So a personal guarantee is where you actually guarantee that you will pay back a specific amount. So, typically, if you're doing something like a mortgage, for example, the personal guarantee is going to be for the entire amount of the mortgage. Whereas if you have a personal guarantee on something like seller financed, where you have a seller financing deal there, you can really structure these terms in different ways. So, for example, one way that you can do it is the actual house is the guarantee. They get the house back if you default on the loan. That's one big way that you can do it, whereas you're not going to owe the rest of the amount. Another way to structure it, like with the business that we did, was you personally guarantee 1 year of payments. And then outside of that, everything else is something where it's just rolling 1 year every single year. And so when you have those structures in place, it reduces your liability if anything were to ever happen.
It's funny, Doc, as Andrew's talking, and the way he talks about debt and numbers, I realize that companies have CFOs, right? And that CFO's job is to structure debt in a way that makes the most sense for the company. But I don't think, Doc, most people think of debt as if they have any type of debt strategy like a CFO. I don't know. Maybe we should.
Well, I mean, we're really talking about risk mitigation here, and I think that's the name of the game. That's the name of the game when it
Name of the
comes to
dame.
debt. It's the name of the dame. If debt is the dame, it's the name of the dame when it comes to debt. Because really, what you want to do, and again, especially when you're younger, you can take more risk. So your risk mitigation may not be as strong as you get older, you start mitigating that risk more and more. And so even if you're, for instance, a real estate investor, you'll see when they're young, a lot of people use a ton of leverage, but as they get more properties and more cash flow, what do? They start paying down those debts. And so what you're doing is you're slowly reversing the lever and changing the risk mitigation as you accrue more wealth. And I think that's, again, what we're really looking towards is how do we mitigate so that we can take some of these risks maybe when we're younger in such a way that it doesn't ruin us, but gives us maybe the best chance at having a high amount of success. And then as we get older and we get more successful, we're really mitigating down and decreasing those levers and taking more control. And I think this gets back to what Morgan Housel was saying is, as you get older, your ability to take the bumps both up and down are less. And so you really don't want to inhibit yourself with huge amounts of debts as you get older and older. But again, when you're younger, you might be a lot more agile.
You mentioned, Andrew, earlier a business, but I think about the number of people that open restaurants every year, and I'm going to have a hot take. That's stupid. Like, you look at the number of restaurants that close every year in America. You've never run a restaurant before, and you're going to be the one that succeeds. Like, it seems like it isn't just running the numbers like you talked about, Andrew. It's also, if you're going to use it the way Doc's talking about to take a chance, I think you also have to kind of look at the success probabilities, right?
100% agree, because something like a restaurant, in fact, the restaurant I think is the number one business that has the highest failure rate across the country. And so when you look at something like a restaurant, I would be much less likely to take on debt for a business like that than a business that's actually already cash flowing and something that you know is actually working already. So there's two different sides to that coin. If it's a startup or something like that, I'd be less likely to take on a ton of debt. I'd rather bootstrap that business. And then if it's something else where you know it's already cash flowing and you can actually kind of run those numbers and see real data, then it would kind of change my decision making. And I'm along the same lines. I think, you can take some of those small risks when you're younger, but as you get older and as you approach retirement age, I'm a big proponent of not having really any debt as you approach retirement age and really have that freedom and flexibility in retirement. Because I think over time, it's just reducing that debt liability, because that's really what it is you're just increasing your risk the more debt that you take on. And so by reducing that risk as you get closer to retirement age, that's going to be really, really important for a lot of people.
Paula, Andrew's talking about using debt strategically, but what Morgan talks about is life sneaks up on you, right? Unforeseen health crises, career transitions, wayward children. I have a friend with that's had some wayward children things.
Root canal.
Good kids, root canals. Yeah. I thought Doug was, speaking of restaurants, I thought Doug was hungry and that's why he was drooling. And then I found out that wasn't why he was drooling at all. But all of these things, Paula, debt sometimes sneaks up on you, right? And now we've got this bad debt in that we just have to take on. How do we mitigate that risk, knowing that these volatile things? So Morgan's talking about these volatile things will happen to you. There's 100% chance it's going to happen to you. How do we mitigate that risk so that the debt monster doesn't creep up on us?
Well, I mean, I know it's been said 1,000 times before, but sometimes things get repeated because they're true. The emergency fund or the rainy day fund, right?
I think you're going to say wear a helmet.
Yes, and a seatbelt, kids. Wear a helmet and a seatbelt.
And we're done. Emergency fund, yes.
Yeah, the good old classic emergency fund. And the emergency fund, it's funny because when the stock market is going bonkers, right? A lot of people become allergic to emergency funds. A lot of people, when the stock market is doing really, really well, you hear from people who kind of start thinking of the market as a high yield savings account. And so they're like, why should I keep my money in cash? Why should I keep my money in this emergency fund earning, if you think back to like pre-pandemic during the ZERP era, right? Money in that era, money in a savings account was making basically nothing. right? Pre-pandemic, whereas the stock market was like going gangbusters. And so many people were like, why should I lock up my money in the savings account that's earning next to zero interest when I could be putting it in the S&P 500 and it's going to go like, phew, right? But then
Wait
something
a
like
minute,
2020 hits.
pew?
Yeah, exactly.
Or like,
precisely. But it's when those moments hit that you realize A, the stock market is not a high yield savings account, and B, this is precisely why it's so necessary to have cash on hand.
I don't know, as we record this about a week and a half before people hear it, I just keep all my emergency fund in GameStop.
Don't forget AMC Theaters, Nokia, BlackBerry.
Are those going up today too? I didn't get past GameStop.
No, they
GameStop
did.
doubled overnight.
Yeah, not as much as GameStop, but I think people were anticipating Roaring Kitty might put his thumb on the scale of those other ones as well. And so they did raise a little bit, even though he didn't say a word about it.
Yeah, that's where I keep my emergency fund. Works out great. Sometimes when it works, right? When it doesn't, you're in big trouble. I think I'm going to end there. I was trying to think of a next question, but I think I'm just going to stop there.
You could just throw in also insurance. That's the other issue. Risk mitigation insurance.
What's that? Great idea. We'll just come to you then for that, and then we'll go to the trivia because I'm excited about the questions in the second half. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Dachi, is there another way we could handle this?
Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind is insurance. And that's what it's exactly there for, are those bumps in the road that we're not expecting. And in fact, you can combine of operations. And actually, step one for him is not an emergency fund. Step one for him is covering your highest deductible, right? So if you're at the really beginning of this process and you want to start risk mitigating, save enough money to cover your highest deductible. It's a start. And that way you let insurance do some of the heavy lifting, but at least you can cover that deductible if you need to.
Well, I love you saying that because I think this is where young people get it wrong often. So if you're hanging out here, stackers, and you're just starting, I see young people with a limited amount of money to get into savings, put all the money in savings, and they forego insurance. They skimp on insurance. You actually need more insurance when you don't have assets. And then as your asset base rises, then cancel those coverages. And I also see older people get it wrong. So I see older stackers that are covering all this stuff. And I'm like, you got a pile of money over here that you could totally use to get this taken care of. Andrew, you look like you want to say something on that.
For sure, and I think that it's really important to kind of have that in play because, especially early on, most people don't understand this, but they need to have that insurance in place, and it helps just cover them from that standpoint. And when it comes to the emergency fund and having that cash on hand as well, closer to 6 months cash on hand when it comes to your expenses. And as time goes on, the more debt you take on, if you're a business owner, whatever else, I think that number needs to creep up even more. And a lot of people will say, hey, I'd rather have those dollars invested, but really it's risk mitigation. If you're taking on some of this debt or you're a business owner, there are things that are going to happen. I mean, life is going to happen. Something's going to happen to you. I've had 12 things happen to me this month already that I didn't expect. And so that's something where we definitely have to have that on hand to protect ourselves. So that combination of insurance and having that emergency fund is really, really important.
I think there actually is, as we're talking, I keep extending this half of the show, but I do think there's one more thing too. Too many people do back of the envelope math when it comes to their monthly expenses. And I think the lack of a budget often gets you into trouble. Cause I know for me, that was part of it for me, man. My kids were born. I had no idea how expensive diapers were going to be. You know, I would not factor in if my car broke down. Like my back of the envelope math in my head was if everything goes perfect. And because of that, I thought I had a balanced budget. Once I figured out that was part of the problem several years later, after I was way in debt, all of a sudden I realized I had to budget for these things, like the new tires or whatever, the to your point, Andrew, the problem of the week, right? The problem of the day. I had to budget for that. So I think the budget has a lot to do with it too. In just a few minutes, we're going to make this a little more philosophical. There we go. Easy for me to say. But before we go into debt and philosophy, and maybe a couple hot takes here on debt that I'd love to run by our panel, we're going to get a little contrarian. We have in the middle of every Friday episode an epic battle to the death. Except it's not to the death. It's just at the end of the year. Between our three contributors, the Paula Pant, Mr. OG, and since we got OG and Doc G, I think we should keep the G's together, and we'll have Doc G play on behalf of OG and my mom. My mom never plays on her own behalf. She can't be bothered to come down those stairs. So, Andrew, you play on behalf of mom, which brings up good news and bad news. Which one would you like first?
I'll go with the bad news first.
Well, the bad news is that mom took over for Len Penzo, and Len won last year. So mom de facto is our champion, and she's tied for first with 5 points, which means you have to guess first this time. That's the part that stinks. The good news, though, is you're in first place. The weird news, you want to hear the weird news, Andrew?
I do.
You're tied with Paula Pant, which everybody's going, what the hell? How did this happen? Mom's got 5. Paula's got 5. OG, two-time winner of this thing, is in last with 4. So Docky's already in last, so you can't do much more damage. So you're good.
All I can do is bring him up.
It's only upside for you. All right, those are the stakes. It's 5-5-4. Doug, you've got some trivia if you can get through this without drooling.
Hey there, stackers. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug. Today, our panel is discussing the one topic I'm more of an expert on than probably anyone: debt. I don't mean to sound cocky, but I've always had a knack for it. Whenever the Powerball gets to an astronomical amount, you always hear people say they could never spend that in their lifetime. Ha! Amateurs. I could spend any amount of money in a week. Tops. I wouldn't even have to win it first. I've racked up tens of thousands of dollars in debt on all kinds of things. Endless accessories for the El Camino. Duh, no brainer. A lock of David Lee Roth's hair I found on eBay. A $9,000.
Totally had to go into debt for that, Doug. Totally had to.
I mean, my hands were tied. A $9,000 haunted bobblehead I got at a garage sale. That one was an extra impressive purchase, considering I got him to accept a credit card at the garage sale. I'm probably the only person in history who's ever done that. It's mostly about charming people, although yeah, I'm sure being handsome helps too. Today's trivia question is, at the beginning of today's show, what was the national debt? I'll be back after these guys squirm and try to come up with some answer.
I like watching all three of them. If you're here with us on YouTube, you just got a great one. Like, whoa, hello. Well, Andrew, guess what? You get to guess the national debt first.
Can I ask a question on the question first? Is it consumer debt or is it U.S. national debt?
It's U.S. government national debt. Okay. You know the debt clock? Doug went to the debt clock at the beginning of the episode, and he's going to try to figure out what all those commas mean in the number.
Okay, let's see. I have no idea. Let's see here. I'm going to say this is going to be, I feel like this is going to be too low. $950 trillion.
$950 trillion. Paula, what are you thinking? It's so weird to call you second.
I know, right? This never happens. First, I have to say, in full disclosure, so I am currently, for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm currently sitting in an office that I have, a rented office in Times Square. And somewhere in Times Square, there is a
the
debt
clock.
You can yes.
That would suck so bad if it was out your window.
So
Paula got it to
craning
the dollar.
my neck, like,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from this particular chair, I cannot see it out my window, but it's right there. It's right there. So, so yeah, close. It's going to be, I know, so close and yet out of visual range. Oh man, 950 trillion. Let's see. So what? I need to give some type of a range. I'm going to go with, how much is a trillion? 500 trillion? Let's go with
500
500 trillion.
trillion. What's 450 trillion between friends? I mean, that's keeping it pretty close.
Well, hold on. Can I take back that answer?
We've never allowed that before in the history of Doug's trivia.
We're making
Because
history today.
Doc hasn't given his yet. I think she can.
I'm okay. I'm okay with it.
Okay, let's go to 100 trillion.
She's
Really?
going lower.
I'm going low. I'm going low.
She's
All right,
going
yeah.
lower.
Going
So
low.
I think one's too low and one's too high. So, in the laziness of not giving you the exact number, I'll go with 101 trillion. So that gives you, Paula, a little space in between, because I didn't do 100 trillion and 1 cent. I give you that little tiny slice.
You'll give you half the
Just
trillion.
Watch the answer be 500 trillion.
I have to tell you, I was more scared of your 500 trillion. I'm a little bit more comfortable with your 100 trillion answer.
Yeah, if it is 500 trillion, Andrew gets it now, right? Yeah, he's closest to that. So we got 950, we got 100, we got 101 trillion. Who's going to win the day? We'll be right back. 3, 2, 1. Andrew, you thought you were too low with 950 trillion. These people thought you were too high. What do you think?
I think I am probably now, after thinking it through, I'm probably a little too high, but at the same time, we'll see what happens here. I think I give you my logic behind it, but I was thinking through just personal debt, and I know what some of those numbers are, and they're in the trillions for sure.
This might be
where I went way up.
This might be the first show Stacking Benjamins has had, any podcast has had in the past 10 years, where we're thinking the national debt, our national debt numbers are too high.
Exactly.
The debt's way lower than what we think. Yeah. Paula, 100 trillion looked good until Doc G took half of that equation.
Yeah, so the reason that I lowered it is because I remember Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, said that he wanted to raise some amount of money, and then commentators were saying that amount of money is equivalent to some major global something. So I don't
Very
remember
specific.
the details. I know exactly. I don't remember any of the details, but I remember it being a smaller-ish number. I don't know. It just kind of inspired me to move the number down.
Yes. Well, if Sam Bankman-Fried inspired you, I'm not sure how great that is.
Sam Altman.
Oh, Sam Altman.
One of the Sams. One of
the Sams. That's a much better Sam.
Uncle Sam.
Is there a difference?
Two
Yeah.
ends of the Sam spectrum.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah.
And Doc 101, you feeling good?
No, but yeah, it seemed like the thing to do. I think my guess was it was closer to Paula's number than Andrew's, but I have no idea.
I think Doc G's just happy he's in the middle. He's not 100 million above everybody like some weeks that he's here. Yeah.
I will not be the last.
All right. Well, we're going to find out if you're first, though, Doc. Doug, what's our trivia answer?
Hey there, stackers. I'm strange item collector and spiraling into more debt by the minute, Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug. Just to prove to you that I'm the expert I claim to be, during the break, I racked up another $9,000 in debt. But just check this out. Within 3 to 5 business days, I'll have my very own outdoor gazebo and sunroom. That was only $6,000. So then I had to buy all the sweet new furniture to put in it as well, as one does. Today's trivia question is, at the beginning of today's show, what was the national debt? The answer? While the U.S. is in an impressive amount of debt, we don't even crack the top 10 countries when you measure by percentage of GDP. Lebanon is at the highest at roughly 350% of their GDP, while the U.S. sits in 12th place at just over 121% of our GDP. What's the answer? Well, I never tell you that. First, I will say that Andrew guessed 950 trillion, which means he was over by just a mere 916 trillion. Paula guessed, Doc G guessed 101 trillion. He was over by 67.
Oh my God, this isn't going to happen, is it?
Paula was over by 66 trillion with her guess of 100. With the United States GDP at roughly $28.8 billion, the total dollar amount of our national debt at the beginning of today's show was $34,736,409,115,214 $1.36.
Paula is truly stunned.
Wow.
I can see it on her face.
has
Wow.
won
Paula's
our
not the only one
trivia.
stunned. What the hell's going on?
Well, this time I do have a speech prepared. I'd like to thank Sam Altman, the good side of the Sam spectrum.
I would not thank Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yes, exactly.
No.
But I would like to thank Sam Altman for asking for some amount of money for OpenAI that's comparable to some other amount of money that made me want to lower the guess.
I guess. That is fabulous. Of course, AI wins the day again, Paula. There it is.
Yeah, exactly.
On to the second half of today's show about debt, because we don't want Paula to get a big head and gloat too much. The second half of the show is brought to you by depositaccounts.com. Andrew, you know what happens when you go to depositaccounts.com?
I can't wait to hear.
Dude, you find out that brick and mortar bank where you've got your savings account, your CD, your checking, your money market, you know what? It might suck. It might not be that great. At depositaccounts.com for free, you can compare more than 275,000 deposit rates from over 11,000 banks and credit unions for free. So you can compare, see just how you're doing, and you might want to change because you look at the top banks, they're nowhere near the national average. As an example, on a savings account, national average 0.52. I was talking to somebody at Bank of America the other day. I think they're at 0.04. National average 0.52. Top 1% savings account as we record this, 4.97, almost 5%. All I did was went to depositaccounts.com and I saw what the top 1% was, and you can click on that button, see where those are, compare, ditch, switch, and save. All right, let's dive into the second half of this, and I want to go right for the jugular. Doc G,
Of course,
I want to talk about purpose here for a moment, because what's interesting when we talk about purpose is I have been visiting some art museums lately, and there was a trend that I saw among many of the greatest masters on earth. And that is that they only created these things because they were up to debt they were up to their freaking eyeballs in debt. While Morgan talks about the possibilities that debt takes away from you, I think that does the hurry up nature of I got to make this thing because I owe somebody actually help you get crap done?
I think it depends who you are. I mean, I think some people are driven by fear, anxiety, having the pressure put on them. And so I certainly think for some people that's a good motivation, but I think you burn out really quickly in life if that becomes your major motivation. So we see this often in people who are driven to become what they become, often because of childhood trauma, often because they were feeling like they weren't enough as kids, or they went through some horrible trauma where they grew up in poverty, they lost a parent. And that really drives them to become the wonderful things they become. But that doesn't necessarily lead to happiness. And certainly it often leads to burnout. And so I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, ideally, we love to take those kind of things, put them in a bottle and use them for short periods of time to help us do ridiculously amazing things. But you don't want to live a whole life that way.
But you start thinking about that, Paula, personal happiness versus a legacy. Your stuff is in the top museums in the world. You are remembered forever by people forever and ever and ever.
But there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. In fact, many great artists died in obscurity, and their works did not become famous until much later. And so many of them died unaware that they would ever have a legacy that would one day be remembered.
I'm counting on that.
And I think something really interesting to remember here is the people who create the Monets and the Renoirs and all these people, we always talk about their legacy. But the truth of the matter is, for every million people who want to be someone like that, they're actually going to fall laughably short and feel anxiety and stress. But think about the people who really made a difference in your life. They weren't the Renoirs. They weren't the Monets. If you love baseball, it wasn't the Mickey Mantles. The people who probably made a big difference in your life, who truly left a legacy, were those people you were close to, who connected with you, who taught you something, who gave you something of importance. It was those people who in very little ways showed you who they were and therefore modeled this wonderful behavior that you eventually took with you. And those are the people who probably leave a much bigger legacy, than the people who create these amazing things that we all strive to. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, those amazing people actually leave a legacy of anxiety and stress, because a lot of people will never be good enough to be those people.
But is that a reason, Andrew? What he's saying, is that a reason not to try?
Yeah. So overall, I think, you definitely, it's something like we talked about a little bit earlier too. I think it's worth your time if you kind of know what you're doing to try. But over time, I think, that stress and anxiety is going to come up over time. And I think, that's something that we want to really reduce. I think money is there to reduce your stress and anxiety. And once you figure out how to actually utilize it as a tool in that way, I think it's much more important to reduce that stress and anxiety than it would be, long term for most people, than to long term, do something that would be a detriment to your finances. But it's worth trying, and if it's something that you are, willing to kind of stick with over time, I think it's really, really powerful what you can do with debt if you do it the right way.
It's funny what you and Doc are both talking about is kind of building a rubric around how you think about debt and how you think about the path that you're on. And it's funny, Paul, I'm going to go to you because you and I are both enamored. It's funny. I was super enamored by this guy the first time we talked about him. And then Paul and I had like maybe Paula an hour and a half discussion. And I'm not kidding. We talked about this guy for an hour and a half. And then Paula, I think, became obsessed with him too. His name's Ken Honda. And Ken Honda talks about the way to think about debt. And he talks about, Paula, debt in a whole different way. Like if you're in debt, you've got this stress and anxiety. Do you remember the way he talks about debt?
I don't remember offhand. I remember many of the things he said. I don't remember offhand.
Yeah, this one really caught me as a guy that was in huge debt. About instead of thinking, woe is me, I don't have any great outcomes. Like I could read that Morgan Housel piece we did in the first half and go, I've got a lot of debt. So the answer is I'm screwed. Ken Honda says, how lucky am I that these people trust me enough to have loaned me this money, and I have the honor of being able to repay that trust and to give them back that trust every month. And it was so funny. I think seriously, if I had thought about my debt that way more in the 90s, I would have not suffered, Doc, some of that stress that you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, Ken talks a lot about, happy money, this idea that if you do things you love that light you up, you'll bring in happy money. And then it's actually, you need to take that money and spend it on things you love. So the idea is happy money coming in and happy money going out. And so interestingly enough, he's not against spending. He's more of the ilk of do things you love, connect with the important people in your life, and happy money will come in. And then you have to send it flowing back out into the universe. And I love the idea of that because it really changes the way we look at things like debt and leverage, et cetera.
It does really show me. Yeah, there's a paradigm shift here.
Yeah. I mean, it again gets back to what I think Andrew just talked about, is realizing that money can be a really wonderful tool to show your intentions and your joy and your purpose. And I think that's what Ken often talks about. And maybe an elevated way to start thinking about these things once we have the privilege and luck to be past sustenance, right? Once you get past sustenance, once you can support your family and do some of the basic stuff, what if we could take this more elevated look and see it as much of more of a joyful thing that allows us to take our intentions and our purpose and create legacy, not in doing something amazing and outsized that everyone can look at in 100 years, but just putting goodness into the world and hopefully affecting other people around us.
I thought about this, Paula, and I was originally coming to you with that before I realized with all the purpose stuff that Doc G talks about. But what
I've just become the purpose guy.
Well, yeah, he's a purpose guy. That's his purpose.
He's all purpose.
That's all purpose stuff. But Paul, initially, the reason I was coming to you is I was thinking about just this idea. I brought up the debt and the masters for a reason. These people were indebted to these people that commission these artworks, and often they even ripped off the masters. Right? They got them for a lot less because the people owed them so much money. They're like, how about if I just paint something for you instead of pay you money? But this idea of being indebted to people. There's sometimes I don't mind being indebted to people. Feeling a sense of debt is almost like, Paula, in some ways, a sense of gratitude toward them. I'm indebted to that third grade teacher who taught me so much about life or whatever it might be. I don't think being indebted has to be as negative as Morgan's talking about.
I think the distinction is it voluntary or is it compulsory? So if you feel indebted, spiritually indebted to your third grade teacher because of the impact that she had on you, or he or she had on you, right? Um, that's a voluntary desire to want to do something to honor that impact, and that's different from compulsory. You owe the IRS money.
Right. Well, but the fact that I owed the IRS money, let's get that, because I've been there too. I don't think there's anybody on earth I haven't owed some money to before. But when I was having my debt problem, and the fact that I got out of that, I now feel this pay it forward to other people that are in debt, right? Part of the reason why I think we all do what we do is we want to pay it forward to these people because we got so much help getting out of debt. I mean, Andrew, the idea of debt, is this really what kind of for some of us can spur us on?
For sure. I think that's the biggest reason why we, talk about it all the time is we want to help people as much as possible get out of debt if they are in debt, specifically high interest debt. And that's the one that really is something that is a big deal to me because it's compound interest working against you essentially. And so that's one that you definitely want to make sure, that consumer debt, that credit card debt, all of those types of things are really, really important. And so getting people free from those chains, which that's what it is. It's a chain that is holding you down against you being able to build wealth, and getting free from those chains is one of the most powerful things you can do, especially if you had no idea how detrimental it is to your finances.
The this idea of no debt, though, Andrew, let's talk about that, because I will see people that have no debt. They're not indebted to anybody. They feel very free. And because of that, they get absolutely nothing done in their life. Is the absence of debt sometimes in this chase that I don't know nobody anything really, could it be killing us?
It can be, I think, a detriment to some people. And really what it comes down to is, what is your ultimate financial goal? Are you trying to, have a couple $1 million where you can retire and, you have a portfolio that's like lean fire, for example? Or are you trying to have a larger portfolio because you have a larger purpose? And so when it comes to that ultimate goal, at the end, that kind of dictates partially what you're going to be doing when it comes to taking on some debt. So, for example, if you're interested in fat fire, you may want to be a little more aggressive on taking on specific pieces of debt and investing in real estate and assets, those types of things. Whereas if you are happy in your job and you enjoy what you do every single day, you're thinking about working until you're in your 60s and you want to retire in your 60s, then maybe you don't have to take on as much debt, and or you may not be able to you may not have to take on any debt whatsoever. So it kind of depends on that final goal, but it can be a detriment to some people, specifically because the trade-offs of investing versus taking on debt. So for example, if you're paying cash for a house right up front, where you could be investing those dollars instead, where there's a low interest rate on your mortgage, then it may make a lot more sense to invest those dollars and take on that mortgage and pay a 2-3% mortgage rate like we saw in 2020, for example. So there are just situational things where it makes more sense to invest those dollars, but it depends on that situation.
Doc, let's go to you. Same question. Is the lack of debt, can that also mean lack of purpose?
No, I mean, I think what the problem is, if you require being under the gun or being in debt to either get something done or feel a sense of purpose, then the story you're telling yourself about yourself is really not a story of agency. It's a story of putting yourself in high risk situations in order to motivate you. And so if someone really is in that position, I would say, you know what, you really need to look at the stories you tell yourself about yourself, because they're probably somewhat unhealthy stories. You shouldn't have to put yourself in a position that might not be good for you in order to motivate you. If you are, then that says a lot about your psyche. I mean, it kind of says, how do I feel about myself? I feel I'm not good enough to do the things I need to do or pursue the purpose I want or accomplish what I want to accomplish unless I'm literally being threatened with disaster. And so the problem with that is, while it may work, all it needs to do is fail once and you can get yourself in a really bad position.
Paula, same question.
So I'd like to draw a distinction between being under the gun versus being in debt. So if you're the type of person who needs the adrenaline of being up against a deadline and got to get this done, the way that you could artificially create that sense within yourself. Let's just assume that you're starting from right now, today, that you are debt free, right? We'll assume that as a starting point. What I would do then is all of your current cash, all of your investments, just hide it from yourself, right? Put it in a bank account, like any cash savings that you have, put it in a separate bank account and cut up the debit card and tear up the checks and purposely lose the login information to your online portals, right? So that the only way that you can access that money is you have to get in your car and physically drive to the bank, right? So now you have forgotten about the cash that you have, you've forgotten about the investments that you have, and now you're staring at, I got to make enough money to eat this month. Like I've got to make enough money to survive this month. And it's a way that you could sort of artificially create that type of pressure without going into debt.
It's funny. I don't know if Doc's going to think that's healthy or not either, Paul.
Well, I mean, but that's much more healthy than actually getting yourself in trouble, right? So what you're talking about is gamifying it, and that's great. I mean, if that's really what you need, I would much rather have you do that, which is incredibly more healthy than actually putting yourself in real risk, because that's what you need as a motivator.
I know there's a bunch of stackers out there thinking that's the question I just asked all three of you is a ridiculous question. I'll tell you, it isn't. The reason it's not is that when I was a financial planner, I would see people work very diligently to get out of debt. Getting out of debt was a goal. So I would get out of debt. And then you know what they would do once they got out of debt? They had no real goals and they would go blow money on stupid stuff and just waste time, waste energy, waste purpose. I mean, they would waste. There was so much waste that I remember during my career as a financial planner saying over and over, getting out of debt is not a goal. Somebody would come in, I'd say, what's your goal? They're like, oh, my goal is to get out of debt. I'm like, that's not a goal. That's a hurdle. That is a hurdle. We need a goal because getting out of debt will not sustain you. What sustain you is having a real life afterwards. And I think that's really where I want to leave this because I don't know, Doc, I still look at those great masters and I'm like, maybe there's something here with debt. maybe I don't care if it's bad or not. I could have people know me forever. But also, most of those people, to your point, did die young. And Paula, to your point, also were obscure, died in obscurity. And
there are a lot of people out there. I mean, I look at the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks, and all these people are so deeply driven. And I think try to gamify things the way you're talking about with debt, where they're so deeply driven. But then you look at them, and none of them look particularly happy. Like, I don't know about you, but Elon Musk does not look happy to me. I don't know if I want to live that life. Like, yeah, it's really supersized stuff. Sounds really great at the outset, but the emotional calisthenics people put themselves through to get there doesn't look like a happy life to me in the end.
I want to ask you guys one more question because you're all people that are very good with money. Unlike Mom's neighbor Doug here, maybe just hypothetically. What's the dumbest debt you've ever had? Andrew, what's the dumbest debt you ever took out?
I took out a loan when I was really young. I took out a loan on I just had credit card debt, like a couple $1,000s when I got my first credit card. And it was because I was living paycheck to paycheck and I just didn't realize how to manage my money. And then immediately once I started utilizing a budget, like I got out of it, within a couple of months, which was great. And that was just the key. It's just kind of like tracking where my money was going to get out of it. But I was in credit card debt of like $3,000 really early in my career when I got my first big job. And then all of a sudden realized, hey, I can't do this anymore. And then, immediately got out of it really quickly. Thankfully, I realized that. Otherwise, it could have got a lot worse. What's
the dumbest thing you bought on credit card debt then?
So I would just buy a bunch of little stuff. And this is kind of something I talk about a lot too, is you can walk into a store with like no plan whatsoever and just start buying stuff and just kind of put it in your cart. And it was all just these small things I did not care about or value. And so that's where like my whole mindset changed to spend your dollars on things that you actually value and don't, frivolously just spend your money on just anything, in any store.
Just say Pokemon cards, Andrew. Just say it.
That's what we gotta say I can't think of like something very specific because it's all just such these little tiny small dumb things that were just like absolutely absurd.
Well, and it's funny, Andrew, because it reminds me of a spoof video I saw on TikTok a couple of weeks ago. This person that was anti-Costco. Like, I'm not going in Costco. And then they go in Costco. They're like, oh, my God, you see what the prices of this chicken? We got to get like 18 of these packs. And then ketchup. And then, oh, my God, bring the whole pallet thing over, Well, look at the price of wine here is incredible. Before you know it, they bought half the store. So you're right. It's easy if you're not mindful to just buy anything. Paula, what's the dumbest debt you've had?
Other than mortgages, I haven't had any debt, but I have
brag.
No, but I have like mispaid, like misfiled taxes and like, and so then you end up getting the statement from the IRS, and then you have all these fees that you have to pay on top of that, like late fees and penalties and things like that. So I would say that's my big one, is just like being sloppy about bookkeeping, and then misfiling, and then you end up with a bunch of fees and you end up with penalties and all of that.
That is the worst letter, by the way. I open up my mail and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I got this, and there's one that says IRS.
Yeah.
And I remember,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's like, oh, here's your new EIN number or whatever. You're like, oh, thank God. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Doc, dumbest debt you've had?
I've also been lucky enough to be born pretty much with a golden spoon in
Oh
my
my
mouth.
God.
But
Look
I
at
will
you.
say that it didn't blow up in my face, but it could have. We bought our first house with a doctor's loan back in 2000. Doctor's loan, no money down, 8% interest rate. And we knew we weren't going to live there more than a few years. And so we only owned the house for 2 years. We happened to sell it for a huge profit, which was complete luck. But that could have really blown up in our face.
Mine, I guess might have to win then, because I used my student loans to buy a personal computer so I could play video games. Like,
and look how
specifically.
successful he is today. So it's obviously it didn't hurt him.
At the time, I justified it that, oh, I'm going to do a bunch of schoolwork on this thing. Are you kidding me? 1992, and the internet didn't exist yet, right? And I'm going to do, quote, schoolwork on this computer. Nope, I was going to play Railroad Tycoon. Yes, I was ahead of my time.
Ahead of your time.
All right, I think this game's over, guys. How about that for a transition, huh? Ninja. Let's find out what's going on where each of you are, so all of our stackers can follow more of your amazing work. Let's go ladies first. Paula, what's happening at the Afford Anything podcast?
On the Afford Anything podcast, so we recently had an interview with the CEO of Cul-de-sac, which is a walkable community based in Arizona. He also was one of the founders of Open Door, which is a real estate transaction company. And so he talks about walkable cities, and designing cities to be car-free and designing a car-free life. We also have Brian Kelly, the points guy, who talks about how to fly all over the world on points. Like, he flies first class, not even business class, first class, entirely on points. So yeah. Oh, and we have the Mad Fientist, a very loved character in the fire community. Yes.
That's like seeing a groundhog now, or seeing the, you know what I mean? You're like, oh, I saw it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he doesn't. He's got his life in Scotland, so he doesn't work the podcast rounds very often. But I actually went out to Scotland and I saw him there. We had a really nice meal together, and we were going to record together in person, but then we just couldn't find a quiet place to record, and we were having too much fun hanging out, so we ended up just doing it virtually once I got back to the US.
Later. Well, we all do love that guy, and getting a Mad Fientist sighting is awesome. And that's at the Afford Anything podcast, where finer podcasts are distributed. Doc, what's going on at Earn and Invest these days, my friend?
Well, we are interviewing, or I have interviewed Sierra Rogers. She wrote a book called The Outsider Advantage. She is the creator of multi-million-dollar fashion design. She creates products for people who are not your average body type. I would just put it that way. She has dressed Kim Kardashian, Beyonce Knowles, and she wrote a book called The Outsider Advantage. She talks about kind of growing up, being homeless, living out of a car, to where she's arrived today, and how she did it by being an outsider.
Wow, that's cool. I love those stories, by the way. It's like Doc G meets How I Built This.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, good stuff at Earn and Invest. Andrew, man, thanks for coming out and hanging out with us again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Dude, so what do we got coming up at the Personal Finance Podcast?
So along the same lines as today, we have an episode that came out yesterday called Should You Pay Cash or Finance a Car? So we go back and forth on the pros and cons of that, which is fun. And then we have an episode coming up tomorrow, I think. It's the step-by-step guide to actually negotiating your salary and getting a raise. And we have a very specific, like, 6-month system that we kind of talk through that's worked a ton of times. And we've talked about this with some of the people that we've done in the past, and they've negotiated 30-40% raises by using this system. So we're really excited about that. And then Brian Preston comes on next week, the money guy that you guys were talking about too. And so he's talking about his new book, Millionaire Mission.
I love Brian Preston. Just such a nice guy. Yeah. Just defines nice guy.
He is. He really is.
And that is at the Personal Finance Podcast. Again, where finer podcasts are distributed. All right, guys, you've got lots and lots of fun listening to take you till our next episode. So go listen to those 3 podcasts. We'll link to them all in our show notes page at stackingbenjamins.com. And Doug, I think you got it from here, man. And by the way, we can't go away without saying a quick shout out to our friends hanging out with us live. We got Colin here with us. Guess who else is here with us, guys? Stephen Boyer is in the audience. Stephen Boyer from Camp Fi. Everybody go to Camp Fi. They got to go to Camp Fi. So Stephen, thanks for hanging out with us, and hello to everybody else hanging out in YouTube land. If you want to see us live on YouTube, become a member of our Facebook group, and that's where we post what's coming up next on YouTube, or just come to our YouTube page and we post it a couple days ahead of time about the exact day and time, so you can hang out with us and watch the show being made. All right, all of you get to hear this amazing piece though. Doug, what should be on our to-do list today?
Well, Joe, I'll tell everybody what should be stacked up on your to-do list today. First, take some advice from Doc G. Debt can be either an enabler or an inhibitor based on how you use it. Want to be a World Cup ski racer? Doc says go for it. That's absolutely the best reason to go into debt. Second, he said it. Second, take a note from Andrew Giancola. Money should be a tool to reduce stress and anxiety. Debt, used the right way, can help with that. But used the wrong way, it can add more stress than a letter from a woman named Karen on your local HOA board. But what's the biggest to do? I got to find a couple of side hustles to pay my credit card bills next month. If anyone needs coaching on how to get into debt, I'm available. I even accept credit cards and am willing to let you pay me as much as you can to kickstart your debt accumulation. Thanks to Andrew Giancola for joining us today. You can find his amazing podcast, the Personal Finance Podcast, wherever you're listening to us right now. We'll also include links in our show notes at stackingbenjamins.com. Thanks to Paula Pant for hanging out with us today. You'll find her fabulous podcast, Afford Anything, wherever you listen to the really good podcasts. And thanks also to Doc G for joining us. You can find his podcast, Earn and Invest, wherever you're listening to me and my sultry tones right now. No credit scores were harmed in the making of this podcast.
All right, everybody. Steven, glad you're here with us, man. Tyson's here. Glad you're here. We've got a bunch of people here, but only 3 or 4 saying hi. Tyson from Alaska here with us. I almost forgot, Tyson, where you live.
How can he not be from Tyson Corners, Virginia?
Karen is hanging out with us, by the way, Doug, and she's not happy that you made a Karen reference.
I know, she never is.
She's like the nicest Karen ever, though.
She totally
she's
is.
The anti-Karen.
She owns that domain.
She disproves the whole Karen thing.
Colin had a couple takes, by the way. He said one of my bosses always said he wanted me to buy the most expensive house the bank would give me the money for, so I always stayed motivated to perform.
Mm-hmm.
That is
get him to work overtime and nights. Yep.
OG and I had a guy we worked with at American Express who was like that. He literally bought the most expensive car he could, and he said it was his motivation to get to work was to make the payment so he didn't lose the car. That was crazy, so unhealthy. And then Colin also said to Andrew, my wife and I 2 years ago had the privilege of paying cash for our house, and I routinely think about whether or not to cash some of it out to put it in the market for the next 30, 40 years. What do you think about that? Leverage, Andrew, leverage.
So thank you. The decision's already made. Yeah, that for sure. But just moving forward, I would just invest those dollars in the market later on, but not upfront if you already paid cash.
Yeah, people forget, like, the big decision is to be aware of and invest in the market, not whether you pay off your mortgage first or put that money in. Like, everyone's worried about missing that. Oh, I'm going to miss the market. I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss
Yeah.
it. But just the fact you're thinking about it is actually the more important change than whether you put your money in the market at any given time or not. Like, just being aware of it puts you ahead of the game.
Yeah, I think, Colin, you should take all the equity out of your house and go to Vegas. Put it on black. That's what I think. All right, Colin, we'll see you in Boston next week. Everybody, if you're hanging out with us here in Cleveland, I'll be there in 3 hours. We'll be there. Paula's going to be with us in Boston.
In
Andrew, Jordan, you guys
that's going to be a fun
fly
night.
out to Boston or come to Cleveland?
I'd love to see you, but no.
Andrew, I always forget where the hell you're at. Where are you at?
I'm in Tampa, so we are getting way too hot here. So maybe I do want to go north.
I know you totally do. I'm in Texarkana where it's already blazing hot too. And I'm like, this is such a nice respite this week before
We're at 99 yesterday.
So when I said that I had my jacket on
99.
the back of my
Yeah.
Because you're in New
That's
York.
right.
yeah, I literally wore a jacket to work today.
Yeah, Chicago's
Andrew's-
like that too.
Andrew's about to give you the finger, Paula.
Yeah, I know, because
Yeah.
I'm like, it's like humidity heaven down here. It's just nonstop. You walk outside and you're just sucked in by the humidity.
All right, guys, I need our contributors to hang with me for a second. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on YouTube. We will end the stream now. See everybody later. Bye-bye.